Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today, our group will presenting translating public science using Vinay and Darbelnet's model. And this is how to translate public science effectively. But first, let us introduce ourselves. Here we go. So, there's the first member, Lalita, from student number 053. And there's the second member, me, Dinda Aulia, from student number 057. And for the third member, Daniel, from student number 130. Next. For the next slide is translating public science with Vinay and Darbelnet's translation theory. So, translating public science is about more than just changing words. It's about making sure the message makes sense in another language and culture. So, you guys are wondering how translation helps overcome language and cultural barriers. Well, public signs are everywhere, such as in airports, stores, streets, and tourist spots. But the way people understand them can vary depending on their language and culture. Well, first we have the language problems. So, what's the problem? The problem is different languages have different structures. So, some words or phrases need to be changed in translation. And for the cultural differences, well, signs in one culture might not make sense in another. That we need to adjust the message to make it work. So next up, we're going through these challenges in translating public sign. So the first challenge is about the cultural differences. What do you mean cultural differences? So what works in one may not work in another. Like cultural norms affect how signs are understood. And for the second challenge is to making it clear, well, public signs must be simple and easy to understand, no matter how and who is reading them. And for the third challenge, about the language differences, of course. Well, each language has its own grammar and sentence structure. What works in one language might not to be changed in the other. Now, we need to know more about who owned these theories. And who is Vinay and Darbelnet? So, Jean-Paul Vinay and Jean Darbelnet, they are French linguists who developed a systematic framework for translating between languages. And in 1958, they introduced the translation procedures, which help translators decide the best way to convert text from one language to another. Next up is, why is their theory relevant? So we got three reasons here, and for the first reason is helps in understanding different translation approaches, such as direct translation that consists of borrowing and literal translation, and oblique translation such as adaptation, modulation, and equivalence. And for the second reason is aids to translators in handling language differences such as word order and cultural context. And for the last reason is guides translators to choose the most suitable method based on the text and target audience. And where we see these public signs. So the first one we must be seen in at tourist attractions. So these signs giving directions and informations. And for the second point is must be at public transport. So these signs in train station, buses, and airports. And for the third point is for health and safety. These signs in hospital or public places. And for different languages and different approaches, of course. So, translating signs in places like Europe or Asia may require different strategies because of language and cultural differences, of course.
Okay, for the next slide, overview of translation procedures. Vinay and Darbelnet model has two main types. First is direct translation, like a borrowing, taking word directly from the source language, called translating expressions word And the last is literal translation, word for word translation. Okay, and the second is oblique translation. There is transposition, changing the grammatical structure but keeping the meaning. Modulation, changing how the idea is expressed. Equivalent, using a completely different expression to convey the same meaning. And the last is adaptation, changing part of the message to better fit the target culture. Okay, for the impact of translation strategies on public sign, there is cultural sensitivity. Adaptation makes sure that the translate sign fits the target culture. For example, changing local reference to be more understandable for tourists. Second is clarity. Reduction and amplification help simplify or add needed details, making the message clearer. And the last is making it fit. Reordering and modulation change the structure of the sentence to make it sound more natural in the target language while keeping the meaning. Application borrowing, free Wi-Fi, translation to Indonesia, Wi-Fi tersedia. The word Wi-Fi is taken directly from the search language without any translation. In this context, it keeps the meaning intact and maintains global familiarity. Okay, the next example, free charging, translation to Indonesia, tempat charging. The word charging is borrowed directly. This is common for technological terms in Indonesian, where charging is more recognizable than a full translation like pengisian daya, in which help maintains. Okay, application called First Aid, translation to Indonesia, pertolongan pertama. These are literal translation, where each part of the phrase is translated word for word. The structure and imagery remains the same, but it still makes sense in the target language. This technique works well when the concept exists in the both culture. Okay, for the application literal translation, there is emergency exit, translation to Indonesia, pintu darurat. The word order follows Indonesian syntax naturally, noun plus adjective, and the literal translation still sound idiomatic and functional in the local context. Okay, the next example is order and pay here, translation to Indonesia, pesan dan bayar di sini. The phrase used word-for-word translation while still sounding natural in Indonesia. It could be argued to contain a hint of equivalence, since pesan dan bayar di sini is a common phrase used in Indonesia service setting, but because it sticks closely to the search structure and words in English.
Now, for the fourth applications, which is transposition, we have the sign danger, high voltage, which translated to Indonesia saying tegangan tinggi, bahaya. The analyzation of this sign is that the sentence's grammatical structure is changed to suit the target language norms. In this case, the English grammatical structure is changed to suit the Indonesian language norms, which explain that English actually uses a noun plus adjective structure, while the Indonesian often places the adjective after the noun. Next is the fifth applications, which is the modulation. We have this sign that says, help, keep the beach clean, which translated to Indonesia as, bantu jaga kebersihan pantai. The message is adapted by changing the perspective. Rather than a command using the structured word keep as an object as well as the adjective, the Indonesian version turns it into a noun phrase as the beach cleanliness with the verb jaga or maintain. This makes the sign sound more natural and polite in Indonesian. Next, for the sixth applications is the equivalence. We have two signs to show the applications for equivalence. The first one is exit. Exit. The translation word for exit is keluar, which is this translation avoids literal word-for-word conversion and instead uses a culturally accepted equivalent. And for the second sign is no smoking, or in Indonesia we say dilarang merokok. Same as the first sign, this translation actually avoids literal word-for-word conversion and instead uses a culturally accepted equivalent. This, or the word dilarang merokok, is actually the standard way to express no smoking in Indonesian. This ensures functional and idiomatic translation. For the seventh applications is the adaptation. We have two signs as well. The first one is please wear a sarong and scarf before entering the temple. The translation in Indonesia is mohon gunakan sarung dan selendang sebelum memasuki pura. This translation is actually adapted to the local cultural context. The original instruction is adjusted to fit Balinese or Hindu customs here in Indonesia. And for the second sign is the fire assembly point, which translated to Indonesia as tempat berkumpul saat darurat. This phrase actually changes the expression to match how Indonesian signs convey emergency gathering points. It's not literal, but adjusts the meaning to be more familiar and effective for the target audience. The conclusion is that this translation of public signs shows the practical application of Vinay and Darbelnet's 7 techniques, which is borrowing, calque, literal translation, transposition, modulation, equivalence, and adaptation. Each and every single one technique helps make sure that the translation is clear, natural, and appropriate for the culture of the language it's written in. The effectiveness of a translation is actually depends on the translator's ability to choose the most suitable technique based on context, purpose, and audience. Thank you, and see you on the next project.